Okay, welcome. This is the You Matter Show podcast. I'm Mark Bradinsky, host of the You Matter Show. One of the reasons we got this thing rolling is because the deepest principle of human nature is the craving to be appreciated. It's not just a wish or desire, it's actually a craving. It's actually more important to us as human beings than sex or money, is to feel that you matter. That's why I got this podcast going. That's why I have my mission, which is to positively impact the lives of 1 billion people. And we have guests on this show, and I am thrilled beyond measure. I can't tell you what this means to me to have this man that I'm going to interview right now, because I've known Marty Bass here for 37 years. It's just been one of the great joys of my life. If I had to rank top 10, you know what, Marty, probably top 5 people that influenced me in my life, you're right there. So it's really an honor. I may even get emotional talking about it, but that's how much you've meant to me in my life. Because we met in 1986 when I first started in television. My name, if the people that are watching this today can see it, says Mark the Blade Bradinsky. That was my nickname at the TV station when I was a producer and on-air talent. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one of my just favorite people in the whole world, Marty Bass.
It's Blade. It's great to be with you. And for those of you watching, I always call him Blade because he's a sharp guy.
That's right.
And transparency here. There's 2 or 3 people in my life that are closer to me than my own brother was, and Blade is one of them. So, we're on equal turf here. I love you, period, end of discussion.
Thank you. Love you too. Love the family. I mean, it's just an honor and a privilege to do this. And, we always talk about certain topics on the show, and I want to start off with the first 2 questions. Then we'll get into some other things, a little more history between you and I too. But sure. Marty, what would you say have been your greatest challenges or greatest challenge and greatest accomplishment in life to this point?
My kids and my family. And I don't say that lightly, because for you folks that don't know, I've had a 46-year TV career at the same television station, WJZ, in Baltimore. And some folks would say, okay, that's enough. That's top of the resume. But that just enabled me to fulfill the goal of providing and giving a stable life to a family in a business that is not all that stable. My goal, and my wife and I kind of agreed on this goal, was to try and stay in the same city. Let the kids have lifelong friends. Don't force them, because of a job change, to have to enroll in a new school, to start from scratch. And that is my greatest accomplishment. First off, the decision to, when my daughter was about 3 or 4, my wife and I made a decision. We're going to make our stand in Baltimore. And if the TV thing can work until we're empty nesters, well, that's going to be the goal. And if it doesn't, figure out a way to stay in Baltimore. I wanted to give my kids the stability that I had as a child, teenager, young adult growing up. And that's top of the resume.
It is, and you've done a fantastic job of that, right? I mean, lasting 46 years so far and still going at the TV station WJZ. I mean, for the people that are local, everybody knows Marty. You're one of the most popular personalities in this city, have been for years. And but the people that don't, like the people that are watching outside of Baltimore, tell me, starting out, getting into this field, into this industry, what was it like getting started in media? Because you started in radio, right?
Yeah, I wanted to do broadcasting from the time I was 5 years old. I can remember it just as clearly as I'm sitting here talking to everyone, the genesis moment. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. There were 2 great radio stations in town. It was a great radio market. And one of the stations, shout out WKLO, had a mobile studio. And once a week, their nighttime jock would visit a different hamburger joint that sponsored his show. It happened to be called HAPS, H-A-P-S. And it was right up at the end of our street. And I asked my mom, would you take me up there so I could see Paul Cowley? That was his name. And I remember, it was like the smallest little Airstream you can humanly imagine. And it had a big picture window on the side. And I remember her picking me up, and I looked in and I could see the lights and the equipment. And here's Paul Kelly. He looked at me and he waved. And we stayed there for a few minutes. They had speakers, you could listen. And there were a few other folks there. And I came home and I immediately ran into my brother's room and started playing disc jockey on his record player, which infuriated him, started a family fight, and we both ended up locked in our rooms. But that was the genesis moment. And at that point, the die was cast. Fast forward the tape. My brother was a big band manager in Louisville, Kentucky, in the mid 60s to the early 70s, when rock bands were a very big deal. Now remember, this is when AM radio was king, and you'd have weekend dances, sock hops, this and that. And he had two of the biggest bands in the history of Louisville rock and roll. Kenny and the Accent Review. Kenny's father was the mayor of Louisville, by the way, Kenny Schmid. And a group called the Alphabetical Order, which actually had a couple of records released. Through him, I knew the boss and personalities of the other radio stations. Shout out WAKY, 79 Wacky, WAKY. And that was my entree into the business. I became a gopher there. Wow. And I also, during that time, got, when I could at 16, my radio license, and I hustled up a job across the river from Louisville. There were 3 cities, Clarksville, New Albany, and Jeffersonville, and each one had a very small AM radio station. And I hustled up a job at WXVW in Jeffersonville, segueing records, Mantovani, stuff like that, Friday night from midnight to 6 a.m. And then on Sunday mornings from 6 a.m. to 9, they actually let me be a disc jockey. Wow. At 9 a.m., I started collecting money and introducing live religion on a Sunday morning. It's 9 o'clock at WXVW Jeffersonville. And here with the word of God is the Reverend Raymond H. Bosler from the First Pentecostal Church of Jeffersonville. And I'd cue him. And they'd look at me. Cue him. Here's the Reverend Raymond H. Bosler. Talk! Oh, here you go. Praise the Lord. You know, it was just unbelievable. And then that went from 9 to 12. And then from 12 to 4, I would recreate baseball games. Louisville had a minor league team, the Colonels. And when the team was on the road, they would mechanically recreate the game. The announcer would be at the AP first inning. It was all in a code. First batter grounds out to shortstop. Second batter, infield fly ball. Third batter, base hit left field. And he would recreate the game. And I would have the sound effect of the crowd and the bat. And it was really cool. It was a great training. Cool. Yeah, so this would be probably 1967, 68. And while that was going on, I'm still working at this big rock station, as a gopher, WAKY. So at that point, the die was cast. I went to college specifically. I went to Southern Illinois University, which to this day has a tremendous media department. And it had 2 stations that only students worked at. One was a campus station you could only hear in the dorms, WIDB. We in the basement, because the studios were in, but it was one of the great college stations going. And I learned a lot there. Then when I came, it's getting boring, let me know, but it's a Forrest Gump-like story. Then when I came back my first summer after college, this big radio station, WAKY, the program director said, "What are you doing this summer?" I said, "I don't have any plans." He goes, "Why don't you be my production director? Because my production director wants to take a 3-month sabbatical." So for 3 months, I was in charge of putting all the commercials on cart, recording the disc jockeys, reading the commercials. It was pretty heady stuff for, at that point, a 19-year-old. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at this point, the story even gets crazier. I decided college wasn't teaching me how to be a disc jockey, and with a straight A average, I quit college and followed the afternoon announcer at Wacky, a fellow named Gary Burbank, who's in the Radio Hall of Fame right now. Gary and another fellow named Len King, who was the news director of Wacky, took jobs as news director and program director in New Orleans at WNOE. NOE stood for James A. No, a former governor of Louisiana, who in his older age had a radio station that was just dreck. It was just in the bottom of the ratings, and he wanted to go out on top, Governor No. And he had the wherewithal to put together a tremendous rock and roll radio station. And for about a year, it was like a comet. It shone brightly, bang, before it flamed out. And we went to #1 and knocked off the legendary WTIX in New Orleans.
Wow.
And now keep in mind, this is in the French Quarter. So I'm now 19, 20, half of 19 and all of 20. I'm working nights, 7 to midnight in the French Quarter of New Orleans. I want you to imagine the lifestyle. I'd get to work about 2, do production, this, that. I'd go on the air at midnight. Hell, let the good times roll. I literally never saw daylight. I was as pale as a white man can be. But now here you go. But I left radio at that point, so I realized it wasn't the end, it was the means to the end. And I went back to college, where I got a job on TV doing the weather, because back then you didn't have to be a scientist. Now they're all scientists, and I agree with that 1,000%, by the way. But it also taught me how to film and edit, and I started doing these crazy offbeat features, which ended up getting me a job in Baltimore, Maryland, doing weekend weather in crazy offbeat features called Catching Bass. This was in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
And the twist to that story, people are you're just going to start calling me Forrest Gump after. I don't know if you know all this.
And believe me, I don't. And I know right now the people that know you, especially in this town, are loving this because they don't know the history of how Marty became Marty.
They're probably just like, this guy's so full of it. But no. So I finished my last broadcast at WSIU-TV. And as I walk out, it was my last one. Finals were over, this and that. They had a news professor, the news director, a guy named Ed Brown, was standing there with a gentleman named Mitch Ferris. He goes, "Marty, I'd like you to meet Mitch Ferris. He came here to see you." And I said, "Well, what are you doing in town?" He goes, "Oh, I'm here for a graduation party. Some friends, their son is graduating, blah, 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 blah." He was an older guy, he's probably 20 years older than me. I said, "What do you do?" He goes, "I'm the chief headhunter for Frank and Magid and Associates."
Wow.
Tell them who Magid and Associates are.
It's one of the top ratings, right? Ratings agencies.
They provided talent coast to coast.
Yeah.
He was the headhunter for the #1 news talent agency in America. And he just happened to be in town and see me on TV and called Ed Brown and said, "Who is this guy?" And he says, "What are you doing with the rest of your life?" I said, "After a hell of a party tonight, I really don't have any plans." So he started bicycling my tape around. The story gets crazier, Blade. So while I'm waiting to see if anything happens on the TV side, the program director of Wacky, Johnny Randolph, who hired me as a gopher back in the late 60s. And Johnny should be in the National Radio Hall of Fame. That's how much respect he had coast to coast. He calls me up, he goes, "Your brother told me you just graduated. What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to try and get a job in TV, but this could take months and months." He goes, "Do you want to do the night shift at Wacky? My nighttime guy just left, and the person I want to hire can't be here until May. How'd you like to have the job until May?" Me working at Wacky? Legit and for real? I said, "I'm there." So I moved back to Louisville. And Blade, you've known me personally and professionally. This may shock you. I was so nervous before my first air shift at Wacky, I had to go in the restroom and throw up. I'll never forget the first time I cracked that mic and I went 79 WAKY, pause, comma, Louisville. The highlight of my broadcasting career to this point.
Yeah.
So anyway, 6 months later, a station in San Antonio hired me, KNS-TV, and I basically was just doing these crazy features. The story gets wilder. And this is going to sound like total BS, but the person involved confirmed me after the fact it did happen. The news director at WJZ, Scott Goodfellow, was on his way to like a Mexican resort, and San Antonio was a hub for Continental Airlines. He's sitting in the bar in the San Antonio airport and sees my report on TV. Has the secretary call me and say, "Send a tape, Mr. Goodfellow would like to talk to you." 46 years later at WJZ.
Wow.
I mean,
I didn't know the history, and like I said, a lot of people don't. But your whole career started getting locked in the basement. I mean, locked in your bedroom, right?
Basically, yeah. When I was 5 years old, but it's like a Forrest Gump movie. It just happened, and the career in Baltimore is almost the same type thing. I was doing these features and doing weekends, and all of a sudden, this is where you're going to come in. Morning TV really hadn't happened yet.
Right.
And WJZ wanted to start a morning show. And they tapped myself and a lady named Oprah Winfrey to anchor the first morning newscast in Baltimore. And by the way, I don't want to get into a big Oprah discussion unless you want to. Yes, she was that talented. Yes, she was that nice. There's no negative there.
Mm-hmm.
What you see is what you get. Hall of Fame person and career. So we anchored for a couple of years, and Oprah went on to Chicago, and a fellow named Don Scott came in, and that's where you entered the picture as the producer of the morning show, which was fly by the seat of your pants. We invented, me, you, and 12, 13, 14 others invented the morning TV that you see now. I don't think that's a stretch, do you?
Not at all. We're on a retro page right now on Facebook, a Facebook group, and I talked about the fact this is literally the top, experience of my professional life. One of them, at least. I mean, the 15 years I spent producing that morning show, and there was nothing like it. It was radio on TV. Remember, there were no mistakes, just opportunities for ad-lib. We only had to do news, weather, sports, but then we just let it rip because we had all these different segments. We didn't care. We went over. We cut commercials, whatever it had to do. That's what we did to entertain people, but also just have a good time and let people know we're just being ourselves. And it is, like I said, to this day, still one of the great professional experiences of my entire existence on this planet. And I'm fortunate because one of the things I wanted to talk about, besides the fact you let the cat out of the bag, you worked with Oprah, which was great. A lot of people don't know that. But Marty got this, it was 2 years, right? That you worked with Oprah?
2 years, yeah.
Yeah. So
she endured me for 2 years.
But I met you in '86. So I was an intern at the TV station while I was still a senior in college. And we used to do the newscast in the newsroom at that point. They were building a new studio. And Marty's in Chroma Key. And they hired me to write for the 6 and 11, even while I was still, working in school. I'll never forget, you're standing in the newsroom in Chroma Key and we start talking. And we hit it off.
He's talking about the green screen, folks.
Yeah, the green screen, right. The green screen. You stand in front of that, and that's where they superimpose the weather pictures behind you. Mm-hmm. But we're just talking. We hit it off, and next thing I know, I'm getting the opportunity to produce the morning show. But you have a talent, and that talent is you have the ability to make people feel that they matter. I've never, in the 15 years that I worked with you, felt any different than that. You always made me feel like top of the world, and you're very good at that because that's what people really yearn for. Like I talked about, that's your craving. You're really good at making people feel special. That's a talent you have. I don't even know if you realize that, but you are great at that because it certainly propelled me in that career because I so looked forward working that show. And the shift wasn't easy, like you talked about. You worked overnight. I worked 10 at night to 7 o'clock in the morning for 7 years because I loved the show. I couldn't wait for first it was 6 a.m., then it was 5:30, then it was 5 a.m. I couldn't wait for the show to start. Right.
Crazy. But that plays into where you're going. You described it on that Facebook post as a raw broadcast. Yes. Which it was. But all of a sudden, I found myself on the crest of the wave that became the morning TV that everybody watches now. And I was astute enough to realize, don't blow this gig. It's a hard shift, but don't blow the gig. Don't go for that 6 and 11 weather job or being the feature star on the 5 o'clock news in Kansas City or LA. Ride this wave. And I was doing the morning show before I met my wife. But in that Genesis moment of don't blow this, ride this wave, Sharon and I were married, and shortly thereafter we had a child. And that's when I decided I'm going to take this as far as I can, start that stability, and let's see where it goes from there. It all goes back to my greatest accomplishment are my kids.
Of course. Yeah. It
And,
makes sense for a lot of people.
Thanks for the compliment about making people feel wanted and needed. But if people are it's common decency. Say thank you. You know, and look, I could go off. I could be mercurial and say, who screwed this up? Blah, 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 blah. And then I want to apologize. But when people are working as hard as they can, appreciate it. Everybody's got a story. Somebody may have had a bad morning. I may have had a bad morning. I'm not perfect. Recognize you're not perfect. Level the playing field. Be kind, be courteous, and move on.
Like I said, we did it real, we did it raw, and we were always being ourselves, which is the most important thing because it's very attractive when you're transparent and vulnerable. People love it. And we were there to have a good time. We all enjoyed working together. It was a special time. And I wish people, I know the people who watched got to feel what that was like. I wish everyone could know what that was like to have that professional experience that's just a lot of fun at the same time and just a camaraderie. And Marty and I would, after the show, go out in the back parking lot, throw a baseball around. Yeah, it was just a special time. And
if you're watching from out of town and you don't know me, you don't know WJZ, the morning show, I think the moral to this long story I involved Blade with here and you with is, maybe set some personal goals and see the bigger picture and prioritize in your life really what is important. What's important to me is not awards. It's my legacy will be, well, that's Marty Bass's daughter. That's Marty Bass's son. She's got a great husband. He's got a great wife. Look at the grandkids. And look at the woman that put up with him until he croaked.
But that the story you told has great lessons in it too, is the fact that you worked really hard. You took the opportunities when they were presented to you. And because you were in the right place at the right time, working hard, luck finds you, right? It's when preparation meets opportunity. You're there because you're taking every gig that comes along that you think you can be good at or that you desire. And next thing you know, the right people happen to see something, but that's only because you're there, because you're actually taking action. You're doing the work, right? You took the hard shifts. You did what you had to do to get to the next place. And that's why it becomes a crazy story, because there's no overnight success. But Marty, in this town, it's like, you're the top. In my perspective.
But let's be honest. I'll tell a quick story on myself. I am working at a legendary TV station, a legacy TV station. There were two anchormen at the time who, when they were on, 9 out of every 10 TVs were watching. For you local folks, Jerry Turner, Al Sanders. I worked with a guy named Don Scott, who to this day I think had more studio awareness than anyone I've ever been in the studio with. A voice as smooth as honey, a great journalist. I've been surrounded, Oprah. I've been surrounded by the best. One time, for a few years, every Halloween, myself and a college roommate and some of his friends, we go out to Las Vegas for the drag races, the NHRA Nationals, right before the finale in Pomona, California. And it was always Halloween weekend in Vegas, and Jimmy Buffett would usually play, and we'd get tickets. And it was the most innocent weekend going. And one of my wife's friends in front of me says, "You let him go to Las Vegas alone?" And my wife, this is almost an exact quote, says, "Listen, honey," my wife has a Southern accent, "Listen, honey, they try and pick him up in the grocery store in front of me. Out there, he's a short, bald Jew."
That's the truth. That's funny.
That's the God's honest truth. I looked at her and she goes, "Well, it's true." So I'm only Marty Bass because I stand next to 13 WJZ.
And there, like you talked about, there were two legends, Jerry Turner and Al Sanders, in local TV. And Jerry Turner, for the people that don't know and aren't from this area, the 11 o'clock news, he had the highest ratings of any local news anchor in the entire country at 11
Period.
o'clock.
Period.
Yeah, legend.
9 out of every 10 TVs on. This is before cable and Netflix, and
Right.
but it doesn't diminish the number. So again, I've always recognized it's not me, it's the situation.
And our morning show was similar. It was a juggernaut for a number of years. So everything you're doing, though, everything you did, Marty, was there a time, as you're working your way up the ranks and you're going from job to job, that you had self-doubts? You thought, you know what, I have an imposter syndrome. I'm not going to get there. I don't matter enough to make this happen. And if you did, how did you overcome that?
No, never had that, because I was surrounded by people like you and other names that folks wouldn't know, and realized we had a juggernaut. We were riding a great wave. And at that point, my daughter's born, my son's born. I'm able to do carpool from school. I'm seeing the advantage of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and having the afternoons free and being able to be that afternoon father. A lot of parents, fathers, mothers can't be because of their jobs. Mm-hmm. So I was able to have the best of both worlds. The negative was after dinner, trying to help them with their homework and stuff. Sometimes I just get a little testy because I was just so damn tired. But generally speaking, I recognized early on, this is affording me the chance to be the parent I want to be. It all goes back to this family thing.
Yeah, that's your focus. And it's obvious by what you're talking about and the fact you committed to doing that shift. It's not an easy shift, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and going to bed, trying to go to bed at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night to get any sleep at all.
I mean, I remember I've always been a Cubs fan. I couldn't even stay up and watch the 7th game of the World Series. I just couldn't make it. But you do what you got to do.
It's the
small
truth.
Small sacrifice.
Yeah, and you have a great family because of it, and you have had a great career because you put the effort into doing what it is that you love it too. That's obvious. And you're also, one of the things Marty's very talented at is being a great interviewer. So for me to interview you, I mean, talk about coming full circle, because I don't know if I ever thought that would happen. And like I said, it's an honor to have you here, because I learned interviewing skills listening to you interview people. One of the things I learned listening to you, and it's a great advice for everybody, be well-read, always gain knowledge, read, look for things you're interested in, but also look globally at things that are out there that, other people are interested in. You always were well-read. You could talk on any topic that was in the conversation. Any interview you had, you always knew your stuff. So you're prepared, but because you're so well-read and always invested in that, you have just such a ton of knowledge. So when somebody brought up a point, you could say, oh yeah, I know that. I know about that. And it wasn't smart. It was being invested in your craft.
And also, I was asking questions that interested me.
Yes.
And if I figure if I'm interested, someone watching may be interested. So, Don Scott, the fellow I mentioned, Don said he liked broadcasting because he learned something new every day. You just file it away, and there you go.
Don Scott, the gangster of love, as we call
him. His nickname, folks, from locally, they've heard gangster of love. We had a sports director who I think doesn't get the legendary credit he deserves. His name is John Buren. John called Don Scott the gangster of love, which is like calling an apple a grape. It was just so off key. Yeah, the gangster of love.
That was how I got my nickname. It was all the guys on the sports production team who came up with my nickname one night. We're all out, partying after the newscast before I had the morning show, and they came up with the nickname The Blade. It just stuck. And then when I had the segment called Fly Friday, that worked out well too, because Chopper, Blade, it was all.
Let me just change the apple grape thing. Let me just describe Don real quick. Yeah. A true gentleman, an absolute family man. I don't think he's ever said a cuss word in his life. Don could get embarrassed very easily. So to call him the gangster of love, boom.
Yeah, he loved it.
Only Buren.
You're right. It was a dichotomy. So what's next in life? You got this broadcasting career, and what do you think is going to be the future?
TV or for me.
Watching your kids grow. Well, let's talk about you're living your future right now, which is the grandkids. Talk about family.
My daughter lives in Birmingham, Alabama, has a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And it's becoming the grandkids. My wife is really got this maternal thing going, and she very much wants to be a hands-on grandmother. And just like when I had my own kids, when they're babies and whatnot, I'm better when they can kind of communicate, even a little rudimentary. But now Quinn, the 2.5-year-old, can have a conversation with me, and it's starting to melt my heart. So yeah, it will be the grandkids and continuing with the family thing. That will definitely be the legacy.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And it's important to you, and you focused on it, and that's what you've accomplished. So yeah.
But I'm not done here yet.
No.
I still look forward to every day. I plan for the future. I do a show at 9:00 in a segment called Where's Marty? We've already got the Where's Marty segments for the next two and a half weeks already planned. So I'm not done with that. But the focus toward the way distant horizon is going to be the grandkids.
And it's a life changer, isn't it?
It is. It honestly is. The first time you hold me, you go, wow, I'm the reason for this. You know,
You're right.
Sharon and I had not had that one final cocktail in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. We'll leave it alone. Come on, you want to get pregnant? Let's go. Whoops. Me and my daughter is Savannah.
What would you say to someone? So you've had this long storied history, and like I said, you put in the work and you made things happen. You got some fortunate breaks, but being in the right place at the right time because you're doing the work. What do you say to someone who either wants to get into the industry or is just starting out in any career? What advice would you give them? Because I think that's a lot of times when people, I have my own children, about the imposter syndrome, wondering, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to get to the next level? How do I start? What advice do you give to anyone, let's say early 20s, trying to make it out there?
Have faith. Have faith in yourself. You chose a path for a reason. May have been here, may have been here. I was looking at myself on the monitor. Somebody might have thought I was pointing at my navel. But you chose a path. Stay true to yourself. When you're young, when you're not married, or if you're married but you don't have kids, you can make a mistake. You can make changes. You're not into a corner. And stay true to yourself and see how the ride's going. And enjoy the good times. Monitor where it's taking you. And if you're going in the right direction, keep it up. At one point, it won't be quite as easy. Excuse me. It won't be quite as easy to make a move. But when you're young, when you're single, when you're not encumbered with a young family, just go for it. Follow your heart, follow your brain. You can afford to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to fail.
Have faith and believe in yourself, right? And take some chances.
Believe in yourself.
Yeah. It's not always easy. That's why this whole You Matter movement that I have, it's important because people don't. And a lot of people don't. So if you believe in yourself and the fact that you're a gift and you're here for a reason and you have gifts and talents, because everybody does, go after it. Like, take some risks. And like I said, don't be afraid to fail, because what's worse than failing? Not trying.
Not trying. Absolutely not trying.
Not doing anything. Would you rather live 30 years full of adventure or 100 years safe in the corner?
30 years full of adventure. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Marty, I really appreciate this. It's been a pleasure. I want to say one thing to you too, though. Go ahead.
I'm sorry I took up so long with the Forrest Gump-like story, but I don't think I've ever in an interview situation said, here it is, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's a long story, but it just proves a lot of points.
Yeah, you laid out your whole history. You're right. It does prove a lot of points, because every career, every success has a road, a path. It's not always even. It's usually not straight, right? It's going to be all these different detours, and you end up in a place you never thought you might because of all the turns that you took to get there.
And trust me, folks, I have kicked myself in the butt more times than I care to count. And at that point, you just pick yourself up and go, "Ooh, okay, let me just get myself together here and move forward and stay true to yourself. Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect.
Trust me. There are going to be some bumps in the road. You will kick yourself in the butt maybe more than once, but it's not the end. It's the means to the end."
That's a great line. People should be writing that down. It's not the end. It's the means to the end.
It's the means to the end.
Well, I want to thank you again. I wanted to end with a quick story because it just happened to me yesterday. So I do health insurance as well as this podcast and some other things, Mastermind Power Coach. But I was talking to a woman I met about 8 years ago. She was a health insurance client and she lost her job and she was looking for work. And I actually turned her on to a real estate agent who's a friend of mine who was looking for an administrative assistant. She told me yesterday when she was giving me an introduction to someone else to help, she goes, "Mark, I just want to remind you that 8 years ago, you changed my life." And I stopped and I thought, wow. She goes, "If you hadn't done what you did by being generous and making this gesture, the whole trajectory of my life might be different." I honestly feel that way about you. Like if I hadn't met you in that newsroom that day, standing in front of that green screen, and we started up a conversation, you believed in me and you saw something in me, I would never have been that producer of that morning show because you had to sign off on it. So did Don, to say, "Hey, this was something that we believe this kid can handle it because we got something special here and we believe that he can actually help steer the ship." That changed my entire life.
Well, thank you, but it's mutual. There were times when, during a commercial break, you'd come in the newsroom and it was all visual, be kind of like, "We're good. Everything's fine. We're good. I'm going back in the control room. Okay, Don, let's buckle our seatbelts and keep going." It was a mutual thing, Blake.
Yeah, thank you. It's like I said, just such a pleasure. It's a pleasure doing this, and you have a great family. Love them all, and I'm so glad the way things have worked out and continuing to work out. So I know the grandkids are a big deal for you, so it's cool to be a grandpa, and I'll be there one day myself.
Yes, you will, God willing.
Yes. Any last words?
Everyone have, because I understand I'm the last of the year.
Yes.
The caboose of you all. Everyone have a happy, healthy, safe New Year's, and let's go boldly forward into 2024.
Let's go. This is the You Matter Show podcast. I'm Mark the Blade Bradinsky today with the You Matter Show, and Marty Bass, my special guest. Marty, thank you. You have a happy New Year as well, and I'll be seeing you soon. Marty.
Done deal.
See ya.
See ya.